All right, let's get rolling with another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about car accidents. A bunch of you sent over some research on some, pretty impactful car accidents throughout history. It'll be interesting to see what we can, kind of dig up here. It looks like we've got everything from, huge tragedies, accidents with famous people, and even those that, changed car safety forever. This is going to be a fascinating journey.
Yeah, it is. It's really easy to think of car accidents as just like isolated things. But when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture,
Mm.
you start to see these patterns come up. And that can tell us a lot about how human behavior, tech, and even like what society values have changed over time.
I like that. Looking for patterns, finding the connections. That's what we do here. So, the first few accidents on this list are, well, they're pretty heavy. The number of people who died, it's a lot. Like, take the 1975 bus crash in Beaune, France. 49 people dead, and 44 of them were children. It's difficult to even imagine.
Yeah, it's a really stark reminder of how far we've come with safety standards. I mean, think about it. Buses today, almost all of them have seatbelts. But back then, not so much. This accident, and others like it, like the bus crashes in Cairo and Tana Toraja, they really forced the world to look at bus safety, especially in countries where maybe roads aren't as good, or they don't check vehicles as often.
Yeah, makes you think about all the risks we take for granted, even something as simple as riding a bus. But these big tragedies, they really did make people wake up and do something about it. It's not always about the scale of the accident, though, right? Sometimes one single event can have a huge impact, especially if it involves someone famous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
James Dean's crash in 1955, perfect example. It wasn't a massive pileup, but it shook people up. Dean was this, rising star. He was a symbol of rebellion, youth. And his death in that Porsche Spider, well, it became this tragic symbol of that whole car culture back then, the one that kind of, glorified going fast. And don't forget, this was before seatbelts were even standard. So you have this image of like youthful rebellion tied to a car that was made for speed with barely any safety features. Makes you think about the risks people were willing to take back then.
Yeah, Dean's crash definitely makes you wonder, was it just him being reckless? Or was there a bigger problem with how safe cars were back then?
Well, car design was different, that's for sure. A lot of the safety stuff we expect today, things like crumple zones that absorb impact, airbags, better brakes, it just didn't exist. As tragic as it was, Dean's accident definitely contributed to people realizing, hey, maybe cars need to be safer. Sometimes progress comes at a cost, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And another iconic figure comes to mind, Grace Kelly's accident in '82. There's that possibility she had a stroke while driving, which shows that accidents aren't always cut and dry. Sometimes it's a bunch of things happening at once, things you can't really control.
That's a really good point. We tend to look for one reason why an accident happened, but it's often way more complicated than that. Kelly's case, it reminds us that medical emergencies can happen anywhere, anytime. And sometimes they have horrible consequences. There's not much you can do about that.
And then, of course, there's Princess Diana's death in '97, the paparazzi, the speeding car, all the questions about the driver. It was just this global media storm. It really showed how much pressure and scrutiny public figures are under all the time.
Diana's death, it was definitely a turning point, not just for media ethics, but also for how we think about keeping high-profile people safe. It sparked this global discussion about, what the paparazzi should and shouldn't do, driver's responsibility, and how to protect people who are constantly in the public eye. It shows that even with all the safety features we have now, human choices and all the outside pressures can still lead to tragedy.
Amazing how one event can create so much change. But it's not always just about tragedy and loss, right? Some accidents, as awful as they were, led to progress in safety rules and tech, like the 1966 M6 motorway pileup in the UK. Can you imagine a fog so thick you can barely see the car in front of you, and then this whole chain reaction of crashes?
Yeah, that was a real wake-up call. It forced people to rethink how roads are designed, especially how to make it easier to see in bad weather. It also showed how important it is to give drivers better information. Think about it. Today we have fog detection systems, speed limits that change based on weather, even headlights that adjust their beam based on how much you can see. Those innovations came from lessons learned in tragedies like the M6 pileup.
Almost like finding something good in all the bad, right? And the Corvair controversy comes to mind, too. It's the perfect example of how one car with that controversial rear-engine design could change the whole industry. Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, it exposed the problems with the Corvair and really took the auto industry to task for not making cars safe enough.
Yeah, Nader's book was huge. It wasn't just about one car, it was about making the whole industry responsible for safety. It started a movement that created the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the NHTSA, and brought about a whole wave of regulations to make cars safer for everyone.
It's crazy to think that one person can start that kind of change. Makes you wonder what issues today need that kind of action, Rangwid. And while we're on the topic of safety improvements that came from accidents, there's the 1972 crash between a DC-9 and a bus in Chicago. It shows that car safety isn't just about what happens on the road, it's about how cars interact with other modes of transportation, too.
Yeah, that one really showed how vulnerable we are when different transportation systems intersect. It led to changes in how airports are laid out and how they operate, all to make sure something like that never happens again. Think about it. Modern airports, with their clearly marked zones and traffic flow, are a result of that tragedy.
It really is a whole interconnected web, isn't it? Every accident, no matter how small it seems, can teach us something. Which leads us to an accident that maybe didn't seem so impactful, a single car crash in Virginia in 1961. It might not have been big news, but it still had an effect on car safety.
Yeah, it's interesting because even accidents that don't involve a lot of cars or people can help us understand safety better. This particular crash, involving 4 young guys, it sparked a bunch of investigations into why car accidents were happening at the time. The findings, while maybe not well known, played a part in the push for safer cars and roads.
It's like a constant feedback loop. An accident happens, we learn from it, and we make changes to prevent it from happening again. But even with all this progress, human error keeps popping up, doesn't it?
It really does. And the research we're looking at, it highlights that over and over again. Drunk driving, speeding, fatigue, distractions. These things are still major factors in accidents, even with all the technology we have in cars now. It seems like no matter how safe we make our cars, it's human behavior that's the hardest thing to control. Makes you wonder, like, what's next for car safety, Are we just going to keep making cars safer? Or do we need to figure out how to change how people act when they're driving? We've seen all these accidents, big ones, small ones, and it seems like the choices people make are part of almost every one.
That's true. It's easy to get caught up in all the cool tech, right? Self-driving cars, all these systems to prevent crashes. But like you said, it's still us humans that are the unpredictable part. And maybe it's not just about, like, personal responsibility either. What about the roads themselves? Some of those bus crashes happen because the roads were in bad shape, especially in developing countries.
Right, yeah. And even in places with good infrastructure, there's always room for improvement. Road design, signs, how we manage traffic, all of that. We've come a long way, but we can't just sit back and think we're done. Like, remember that M6 motorway crash? That thick fog was a big reason why it happened? Yeah, we have fog detection systems now, but could we design roads to be safer in fog? Maybe things like reflective surfaces, better lighting, or even speed limits that change depending on how much you can see?
Those are some good ideas. And it makes me think, how do we design roads for a future where there are self-driving cars and regular cars? That just makes things even more complicated.
Well, absolutely. And it's not just about the physical stuff either. We got to think about the digital side too. Communication networks, data sharing, cybersecurity. Yeah. As cars get more connected and rely on tech, those systems could become weak points. Imagine someone hacking a car's brakes or causing a huge traffic jam by messing with traffic lights.
Okay, now that sounds like something out of a movie, but it's not that crazy, is it? I mean, we've already seen cases of car hacking, and the more software cars use, the riskier it gets.
Exactly. So while we're excited about all this new tech, we can't forget about the new risks that come with it. And that's where we need to look at things from all angles, not just focusing on the tech, but also things like cybersecurity, ethics, and even just teaching people how to use it all safely.
So it's not just about making cars safer, it's about making a whole safer environment for those cars to be in, one that takes into account human behavior, the roads, and the risks of everything being so connected.
That's a great way to put it. It's about realizing that car safety isn't just the car maker's job or the driver's job. It's a shared responsibility for everyone. People who make laws, researchers, tech companies, and everyday people. We all have a part to play in making roads safer.
It's a huge challenge, but kind of exciting too. We're really at the beginning of some big changes in how we get around, and that means new ways to think about safety.
Definitely. And as we move forward, it's important to remember the past. All these accidents we've talked about, the big tragedies and the smaller ones, they all teach us something. And that knowledge can help us create a safer future.
It's like we're constantly evolving, learning from mistakes, and coming up with new ideas. And that brings me back to something you mentioned earlier, public awareness. We've talked about tech, roads, regulations, but what about just teaching people about the dangers of driving and what their responsibility is? Do you think that would make a difference?
Public awareness is so important. We can have the safest cars, but if people are reckless, accidents will still happen. And it's not just knowing the rules, it's understanding how cars work, how long it takes us to react, and how things like being tired, distractions, or even just our emotions affect our driving. It's about going beyond the basics and really understanding how complex driving is.
Like, we need to go beyond that driver's ed class everyone takes. Maybe we should think of driving as a skill you need to practice and keep getting better at, instead of something you learn once and just do without thinking.
I like that. Driving is like any other skill. It takes focus, practice, and being able to adjust to different situations. And as tech changes, we need to keep learning how to use it safely. Like smartphones, they're so useful, but they're also super distracting for drivers.
Ugh. Distracted driving, it's the worst. We've all seen people texting or scrolling while they're driving. It's scary. It's like they don't even realize they're putting themselves and everyone else in danger.
It really is scary. And it shows that we need to change how we think about driving. We can't just accept that it's okay to do other things while driving. We have to start thinking that focused driving is not only safer, but it's also more enjoyable and less stressful.
It's about respecting driving for our safety and everyone else's. And that respect should go beyond just cars. Pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, we all have to share the road.
Exactly. We're all in this together. And realizing that is key to creating a safer and better transportation system for the future. And I think that future will be shaped not just by new technology, but also by understanding human behavior better, being responsible drivers, and being willing to adapt as transportation changes.
It's a lot to take in, but it's clear that we're not done making roads safer. We've made progress, but there's more to do. And we have to do it together. There's no other way.
I agree. And as we continue this journey, think about what we've talked about today. Think about your own role in creating a safer future for everyone on the road. Even small changes in how we drive can make a difference.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into car accidents and all the lessons we've learned, let's leave our listeners with a final question to think about. So if you had, like, a magic wand, right, and you could change just one thing to make roads safer, what would it be? Big question, I know. But maybe thinking about it will help us all be better drivers, even without magic.
That's a really great question to end on. It makes you think about everything we've been talking about and how it applies to, our own lives when we're behind the wheel. For me, it comes down to people. If I could change one thing, it wouldn't be adding some new tech to cars. It'd be making every driver out there really understand empathy and responsibility.
Empathy behind the wheel. I like that. What do you mean by that?
Like, imagine if everyone driving actually saw the people in the other cars, not just as, like, obstacles or random faces, but as actual people with families and dreams and lives just as important as their own. And everyone understood that how they drive affects way more than just themselves.
So you're saying instead of me against them, it should be more like we're all in this together.
Yeah, exactly. If we could all feel that way, I think it would make a huge difference. Not just fewer accidents, but people would be more polite, less angry, and maybe even more willing to share the roads safely with people walking and biking.
I like that vision. It makes me think about the bigger picture. We talk about car safety with numbers and tech, but really it's about human connection and taking care of each other.
It is, and it reminds us that while all this technology is important, it's not the whole answer. The real way to make roads safer is to remember that we're all human and to make choices that show that.
Well said. That's a perfect way to wrap things up. To everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the history of car accidents. We covered a lot, and I hope it was informative and made you think, and maybe even inspired you a little.
And remember, next time you're driving, think about how your actions affect not only you, but everyone else on the road too. Drive safe, everyone.